Hey, so who are you?
I'm Jake Monahan. I'm a PhD student at the University of Buffalo.
Welcome to Rome.
Thank you.
What's the issue here?
So the issue is what accounts for the special moral obligations we have, particularly to our children, or more generally, familial obligations. So some people think that we have these special moral obligations in virtue of biological or genetic connections. And if that's the case, then it's relevant, I think, to biological or speciesist accounts of moral status.
Good. And so what's your take on this?
So my take on this is that the biological account of special moral obligation fails, and with it, biological or speciesist accounts of moral status.
Okay, so is there sort of a nutshell version of what the problem with those views is?
Yeah, sure. So we can ask why we would think that biological connections underlie special moral obligations.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so why do some people think?
So the natural place to start is to think about the obligations we have to our children. Seems like we have stronger moral obligations to our children than we do to other people's children or to friends or more distant family. And so that might motivate you to think that it's in virtue of this biological relationship that we have these special moral obligations. The problem is that in almost all cases, the parent-child relationship is not merely a biological relationship. So some philosophers, in particular Jeff McMahon, have developed a thought experiment that he calls the sperm donor in order to try to elicit this intuition that it is in fact the biological connection that's doing the work here.
All right, so let's talk about the sperm donor case for a minute. So what's involved in the case?
So in the case, a man donates sperm at a sperm bank. He signs an agreement that absolves him of responsibility, legal responsibility for the resulting child. And then some years later, the child is ill, needs a life-saving bone marrow transplant, and desperate to find a suitable donor, the woman breaks into the clinic, steals the records, gets in touch with the man, and approaches him with a plea to donate bone marrow.
Okay.
So now Jeff McMahon, and I think many people in fact have the intuition that the sperm donor has a special moral obligation to donate the bone marrow. But now he doesn't know the child, he hasn't agreed to take care of the child. So if you have this intuition, McMahon thinks that what explains this, the only thing that can explain it, is the genetic or biological connection.
Okay, the idea is because that's you've sort of separated out any other possible morally relevant factor in the claim. This is all stuff. Okay, got it. Okay, so assuming a lot of people do share McMahon's intuition, what's wrong with that?
So there are a number of things wrong with that.
Okay.
The case only actually counts as support if it succeeds in isolating the genetic or biological relationship.
Sure.
But it, in fact, I don't think does that. There are what I call three contaminants in this case, and those are the severity of the harm, so the child's going to die without the bone marrow.
Okay.
There is the unique ability for the sperm donor to provide aid. It's difficult to find a suitable match, and so he's uniquely in a position to provide aid, or almost uniquely. And then finally, he is causally responsible, in some sense, for the fact that this child exists, and subsequently the child's need for aid.
Okay, got it. And so what are we supposed to conclude from this then? That if we fixed up the sperm donor case to take rid of the contaminants, we'd get a different intuition?
Yeah, so that's what I've done here. I have three cases, poor eyesight, the blood donor, and the bad doctor. And each of these cases is designed to remove the contaminants.
I see. So could you maybe just talk us briefly through one of them?
Yeah, sure. So let's go for poor eyesight. So in this case, it's very similar to the sperm donor case. Except rather than needing a life-saving bone marrow transplant, the child has slightly less than perfect vision, and so gets mild headaches every now and then. But the mom can't afford to buy glasses, and so similarly, she breaks into the clinic, steals the records, approaches the man and says, "Please pay for my child's glasses." Now I have the intuition here that the man doesn't have a special moral obligation to provide aid, to pay for the glasses.
Okay, so no stronger than he would have to donate money to help someone else buy glasses for their child. Okay.
So there may be an obligation, but it's not a special moral obligation.
Okay, and so the basic idea is if we share your response to the modified versions of the cases, we're entitled to conclude that McMahon drew a faulty inference from the response we had in that case? Good.
Yeah, the upshot is that it seems like this is the only sort of support that we could offer for the claim that biology underlies special moral obligations.
Okay, and so if you've defeated that argument, then there's no reason to accept that.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about how the session went when you were talking to people? What kind of questions came up? Were people convinced? Were there big objections?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the session was great. Thanks for inviting me on to do it.
Oh, yeah, you're having
I think it was pretty well received. A lot of people were sympathetic. I got pushback in a couple of different areas.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there were two main areas where people were not very convinced. The first has to do with my characterization of a special moral obligation.
Okay.
So I say that a special moral obligation, of which parental obligations are the sort of paradigmatic example, is what distinguishes them is the strength of the obligation and the particular direction of the obligation. So it's towards a particular person. Now, some people did not like this account. They thought that it has nothing to do with the strength. It has only to do with the person to whom you have the obligation.
Okay.
So I'm not wedded to this account of the special of the special moral obligation. I can just sort of gesture at it and say, we know when we see it, the parent-child relationship is the sort of paradigmatic example. And so I don't think too much hangs on how I characterize this.
Okay, and then you said there's one other kind of
the one other thing is I offer an alternative account for why parents have special obligations to their children.
Okay.
Now, it's intended to capture the notion that the obligation that a step-parent has or an adoptive parent has to their step or adopted child, it's a unified account. So the same account explains why you would have an obligation to a biological child as to a stepchild. So I call it the kinship account. It's really just a sketch of an account. Some people, particularly the libertarians, think that so I suggest that it's in virtue of shared goals or values or a commitment of the will to take on this obligation. So a lot of libertarians will push back and say, in fact, it's actually just property rights or something like a property right.
Okay.
Now this is to say that there just are no special obligations. I don't think that this is right, but I'm not wedded to this account either. And other people thought that it's something like a promissory-based obligation, and so it's not as robust as what I'm calling the kinship account. It's really just like, well, you implicitly or tacitly promise to take care of your child or something like that. I don't think that that's a problem for what I've argued here. I think that you can fill in any alternative account, and I'm not wedded to one. But I think that at the least, what we need is some other account that explains why parents have special obligations to their children.
Right, makes sense. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
Take care.